911, what's your emergency?
It's Emma. She was running by the lake, and the gator just launched at her.
Is she still visible? Do you see her now?
No, it dragged her under. Oh God, there's so much splashing. She's gone.
What began as an ordinary morning run turned into something ancient and brutal. Emma Clarke, 34, was a wildlife educator, a runner, and a believer in coexistence. But when she entered the misty trails of Silver Pines Reserve that day, she crossed a line nature doesn't recognize. The attack lasted seconds. Her body was found partially intact, days later, downstream. Phone footage captured only splashes and screams, but what led to that moment tells a much deeper story. Was this truly unpredictable, or the final chapter of a warning long ignored? You're watching Animal Shock Stories. Subscribe for more true cautionary tales from the edge of the human-animal boundary. And tell us in the comments, was Emma a fearless advocate, or did she mistake respect for control? Emma Clarke was the kind of person who didn't just talk about loving nature, she lived it, breathed it, and ran straight through it. At 34, she had built a quiet but devoted online, following through her work as an environmental educator and wildlife advocate. But it wasn't polished science documentaries or lectures that made her stand out. It was the raw, unfiltered footage she shared from Florida's wildest corners, especially from Silver Pines Reserve, a sprawling wetland park she called her sacred place. Emma was a marathon runner, and she often filmed short clips during her morning jogs, pausing to admire birds, turtles, and sometimes, yes, alligators. In one now-haunting clip, she crouches by the water's edge, a full-grown gator basking 10 feet away. "He's not hunting," she says, smiling into the camera. "He's just watching me. Coexistence isn't about fear, it's about respect." Her captions often echoed that philosophy. Respect the misunderstood. Fear divides, understanding unites. Don't demonize the dinosaur. To Emma, the alligator wasn't a monster, it was a misunderstood neighbor, part of the ecosystem she cherished and championed. Locals had mixed feelings. Some admired her courage and conviction. Others, like longtime resident Beverly Sandstrom, had quietly worried. She'd stop and talk about gators like they were cats on a porch, Beverly later recalled. She meant well, but she forgot they don't think like we do. Still, for those who knew her, Emma's devotion was never in doubt. She volunteered at schools, gave talks on wetland preservation, and organized cleanups around Silver Pines. Her friend and former colleague, Marcus Levin, put it this way: Emma didn't think animals were dangerous, she thought ignorance was dangerous. She believed if you respected them, they'd respect you back. The more time she spent at Silver Pines, the more it became part of her identity, and the more she began to believe the gators there knew her. She even gave one of the larger males a nickname, Gentle Jaw. She told friends he'd been there for years, that he was calm, observant, and knew her smell. She believed their shared territory meant shared trust. Her followers would often ask if she was scared running so close to the water. Emma always gave the same answer: not when I know who I'm sharing it with. But nature doesn't offer contracts, and instinct doesn't read intentions. The trails she loved, the gators she filmed, the quiet dawns she ran through, all would play their part in what was to come. The irony bleeds through in hindsight, that someone so committed to preserving life would lose hers in a place she considered sacred to a creature she once smiled beside. Emma wasn't foolish. She was sincere, educated, and deeply devoted. But sincerity doesn't tame instinct, and that belief that love and knowledge could rewrite a reptile's brain would prove fatally naive. The signs were clear, literally. Just a month before the attack, bright yellow placards had been hammered into posts along Silver Pines Reserve. Warning: alligator activity reported. Do not run near shoreline at dawn or dusk. They weren't just for liability, they were a desperate attempt by local wildlife officers to prevent exactly what would unfold. The animal in question had become something of a myth around the lake, an unusually large male with a jagged scar over his left eye, dubbed Old Scar by fishermen and rangers alike. He'd been spotted numerous times in recent weeks, each time edging closer to the popular outer trail, especially during the cooler hours. According to Ranger Doug Halley, that gator had stopped fleeing when people approached. He was asserting territory. That's a red flag, we told everyone, especially joggers, to keep to the inland path. But warnings are only effective when they're believed. For Emma Clarke, they read more like panic than precaution. In a now-deleted Facebook reply to a concerned friend, she wrote, "If we keep treating these animals like villains, we'll never learn to live with them. Fear-based hysteria helps no one." She wasn't trying to be reckless, she was trying to be brave, to model the very harmony she preached. But bravery, when untethered from caution, can become blindness. Her closest friends now struggle with that balance. One, who asked not to be named, said, "We begged her to take the upper path. She just laughed and said the gators knew her." At the time, it didn't seem urgent. The weather was stable. There hadn't been an incident in years. But reports filed internally at the reserve told a different story, at least 4 near-miss encounters involving that same gator in the past 6 weeks, including one where he followed a cyclist for nearly 30 feet. A staff intern had even recommended trapping Old Scar, citing increased aggression during the mating window. The proposal was shelved. Too costly, too disruptive. Besides, they reasoned, the public had been warned. That assumption would prove devastating. Emma wasn't oblivious. She had read the reports, seen the signs, but her worldview couldn't square the idea that the same creature she had watched sunbathe for years could suddenly turn predatory. She chalked up his proximity to curiosity, not dominance. The warnings piled up like storm clouds ignored by the system, dismissed by the one person most at risk. This was no sudden ambush. It was the tragic conclusion of a tension slowly building, unspoken but visible, along the water's edge. Nature had given notice, but no one truly listened. And in that silence, the trap was set not by the alligator, but by the human refusal to see instinct for what it truly is. Not evil, not malice, just survival waiting for its chance. The sun had barely risen over Silver Pines Reserve when Emma Clarke set out on what would be her final run. A low fog hugged the lake's surface, blurring the line between land and water, and the only sounds were the rhythmic thud of her sneakers on the damp trail and the distant croak of herons waking in the reeds. She moved with familiarity, taking the outer path that curved dangerously close to the shoreline, her usual route, the one she always defended. A tourist from Michigan, walking the opposite direction with his wife, captured a short clip of Emma jogging past. She offers a polite wave. She's smiling. Just minutes later, everything changes. "I saw the splash and heard screaming, then nothing," the man later told authorities, his voice trembling. The forensics suggest Old Scar was hiding in a shallow embankment beneath overhanging brush, nearly invisible in the murky water. He waited. Then, in a burst of raw muscle, he launched. The pull, the twist, the silence. Experts believe he clamped onto Emma's leg mid-stride, using his weight to drag her down the bank. The imprint in the mud showed deep gouges from her hands. She fought, hard. But with alligators, it only takes seconds. Once the death roll begins, the body loses orientation, the lungs fill, and survival becomes a mathematical improbability. "If you don't break the grip within 10 seconds, it's over," said Dr. Luis Mantero, a reptile behaviorist consulted after the attack. And even then, most don't walk away whole. Emma didn't. It took authorities 36 hours to find what was left: torn clothing, a running shoe, and scattered remains lodged in reeds downstream. A drone hovered over the lake during the search. The footage, released later, shows divers dragging weighted nets, officers lining the muddy bank, and yellow police tape fluttering next to the very trail Emma once called peaceful. A rescue dog barked uncontrollably near the water's edge, refusing to move. Forensic teams found trace blood patterns on the roots where she'd been pulled in, too diluted to show clearly, but enough to tell the story. Her smartwatch was never recovered. Rangers believe it sank during the roll. In the days following, Even hardened search personnel struggled with what they saw. One EMT, speaking anonymously, said, "We see a lot of bad things, but this felt personal. Like the wild took offense to her trust. The raw savagery of the event stunned even those who'd lived around gators their whole lives. There was no warning growl, no warning at all. Just the silent decision of a prehistoric predator doing what it's always done." The scene was eventually cleared, but the scars remained on the mud, in the minds of those who responded, and in the footage now circulating among true crime and wildlife forums. A moment of miscalculated trust, a half-second too close, and the rules of nature reclaimed their place. Emma never stood a chance, and nature never hesitated. Emma Clarke's death did not end with the silence of the lake. Within hours of the official report confirming her as the victim, headlines erupted across the country. Florida wildlife advocate killed by alligator she tried to defend. News anchors debated the tragedy with grim fascination. Footage from her social media pages played on a loop, her calm voice describing gator behavior, her smiling face just feet from the water. Overnight, Emma became a symbol, but what she symbolized depended on who was speaking. To her supporters, she was a martyr for coexistence, a woman who lived her values until the very end. Tributes poured in from wildlife communities, former students, and environmentalists. "She taught me that loving something wild doesn't mean taming it," one comment read, but a darker tone took hold as well. Critics labeled her reckless, irresponsible, a cautionary tale in denial. One viral post summarized the backlash bluntly: "Respect is fine, but don't run with dinosaurs." The arguments played out in comment threads, news panels, even academic circles. Was Emma's death the result of blind faith, or the failure of institutions to draw clearer boundaries between admiration and safety? The debate only intensified when a makeshift memorial sprang up at the trailhead. Dozens of locals laid flowers, photos, and running bibs along the old wooden fence, now overshadowed by a new, larger warning sign. "Active Gator Zone, trail closed until further notice." Rangers sealed off the shoreline path indefinitely, citing public safety concerns. A moment of silence was held at Silver Pines the following weekend, attended by over 200 people, including state wildlife officials and Emma's family. Her sister, Rachel Clarke, stepped up to speak, her voice breaking under the weight of grief and fury. "She didn't die because she was stupid," Rachel said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "She died because she believed too much in people, in nature, in the idea that love is stronger than instinct." The words struck hard, reframing the story not as a tragedy of ignorance, but of over-trusting a world that doesn't return the favor. The emotional stakes rose as the public watched Emma's story turn into a cultural fault line between those who romanticize nature and those who fear it. The debate soon spilled into a broader conversation about so-called nature influencers, with some calling for new regulations on content that downplays wild animal risks. Experts weighed in across media platforms. Dr. Kalani Jones, a behavioral ecologist, said, "The problem isn't admiration, it's projection. We think they know us because we know them. That illusion is fatal." Emma's legacy became fractured, part inspiration, part lesson. But one thing was certain: her death shattered the illusion that knowledge and affection are enough to hold back teeth and instinct. It forced everyone, from hikers to policymakers, to confront the blurry line between awareness and naivety. And in that confrontation, Emma became something more than a victim. She became the question no one could comfortably answer. Was she brave or tragically wrong? Or was the real danger never hers to carry in the first place? In the weeks after Emma Clarke's death, while grief dominated headlines and the debate raged on, a quieter investigation uncovered something far more disturbing: evidence that Emma herself had tried to warn the very people now mourning her. A series of internal emails leaked to the press revealed that Emma had contacted Silver Pines Reserve staff 3 weeks before the attack, reporting multiple gator sightings along the trail she ran each morning. Her messages were polite but urgent. She urged them to install larger, clearer signage and restrict shoreline access during dawn hours. but her concerns were brushed aside. One park supervisor replied with a short note: "Appreciate the passion, but no cause for alarm at this time." Another internal comment, never meant for public eyes, read, "Emma's known for dramatizing wildlife behavior. She's more PR than policy." The implication was chilling because Emma was vocal and passionate. She wasn't taken seriously. She was seen not as a credible observer, but as an overly idealistic nature lover with a platform. An anonymous staff member later told a reporter, "They ignored her because of who she was. They saw an advocate, not a whistleblower." The realization painted a different portrait of her final days. She hadn't blindly walked into danger, she had seen it, tried to call it out, and been muted by the very system that claimed to protect people like her. But the warnings weren't just human. They were ecological, and they had been building for years. Satellite data, reviewed by the Florida Wildlife Institute, revealed a steady encroachment of gator territories into human access zones. Why? Because the wetlands were shrinking. Seasonal water levels had dropped significantly over the last decade. Habitats that once kept apex predators safely away from footpaths were vanishing. At the same time, warmer winters were triggering earlier mating cycles. By March, gators were already aggressive, territorial, and restless. Dr. Tessa Moreno, a climate ecologist, explained, "Climate change doesn't just melt glaciers, it reprograms behavior. When habitats compress and temperatures spike, territorial conflict increases and humans become part of that conflict zone." Silver pines, once a buffer between wild and civilized, had quietly become a fracture point. Emma's trail was no longer just a scenic route, it was contested ground. The alligator wasn't stalking new territory, it was defending shrinking ground it had once owned without challenge. And Emma, unknowingly, was running directly through it, day after day. The tragedy now carried a second layer of horror, not just the bite of an ancient predator, but the slow, indifferent squeeze of ecological collapse that pushed them closer together. The oversight wasn't just bureaucratic, it was systemic, baked into how society views both conservationists and the wild. Emma was caught between two forces she couldn't control: the indifference of human institutions and the escalating desperation of a wounded environment. She didn't just run into danger, she was running along its edge for months, while everyone else looked away. To truly understand what happened to Emma Clarke, we have to step outside the realm of emotion and into the cold-blooded reality of reptilian behavior. According to wildlife biologists who reviewed the attack, the event followed a disturbing but predictable pattern, one that becomes more common each year as human activity overlaps with shrinking animal territory. Dr. Stephen Greaves, a herpetologist at the University of Florida, broke it down bluntly. It wasn't an ambush. It was a warning strike that became fatal. During the spring and summer months, male alligators become increasingly territorial as mating season begins. Their energy spikes, their boundaries contract, and their response time shortens. What may have once been passive observation near a trail becomes an assertion of dominance. But because alligators don't snarl or posture like mammals, their warning signs often go unnoticed. "That's the real danger," Greaves said. "There's no drama, just instinct. You're within range, and then you're gone." Reptiles don't have expressive eyes or facial cues that allow humans to gauge intention. A calm-looking gator may not be calm at all. This physiological mismatch leads to a tragic psychological failure. Humans projecting emotional depth and intention where there is none. In Emma's case, it seems she interpreted the gator's stillness as tolerance, perhaps even familiarity. But stillness in predators is not a sign of peace. It is a mechanism of focus. It's the silence before a strike. This fundamental misreading has occurred before, with chilling results. Over the past decade, Florida and Louisiana have reported multiple fatal attacks involving people who claim to have known the animals involved. In 2017, a kayak guide in St. Martin Parish was pulled from the shore while feeding a gator he'd named. In 2020, a Florida man who often swam in a local retention pond disappeared, later found to have been attacked by an alligator he had once filmed sunbathing. these weren't random victims. They were people who believed they had established a bond. Experts now refer to this as wild bonding, a false sense of trust formed through repeated exposure without incident. It's a dangerous illusion. "We think because an animal hasn't hurt us, it won't," said Dr. Maya Chen, a wildlife behaviorist. But instinct doesn't operate on relationships, it operates on opportunity. Reptiles don't make friends, they don't remember faces, they don't weigh the past when making split-second decisions. They simply act, and that action, when it involves 0 pounds of bite force and a death roll honed over millions of years, doesn't leave room for regret. Emma's death, tragic as it was, fits within this unsettling truth. She loved nature not foolishly, but deeply. Yet even deep love can't bridge the cognitive void between human trust and animal instinct. The takeaway isn't to fear wildlife, but to respect its rules that are indifferent to human emotion. As Dr. Greaves summarized, wild doesn't mean malicious, but it never, ever means safe. Emma wasn't betrayed. She was misread, and in that misreading, we find the true lesson. Emma Clarke wasn't foolish. She wasn't reckless. She was passionate, achingly so, and tragically idealistic in a world that doesn't make exceptions for either trait. Her social media now reads like a eulogy in motion, a slow montage of hope framed by filtered sunlight and fearless smiles. In one video, she kneels near the shore, pointing to gator tracks in the mud. "They're not stalking," she says softly. "They're surviving, same as us." In another, she jogs past the waterline, earbuds in, waving to someone off camera. Her caption reads, "Day 126, still coexisting." These moments, once symbols of fearless love for the natural world, now echo with sorrow. Not because they were staged or performative, but because they were genuine. Emma wanted harmony. But nature doesn't grant harmony on request. The wild doesn't read intentions. It responds only to action, to presence, to proximity. And when the line between admiration and intrusion blurs, the consequences fall swiftly and without apology. In the wake of her death, state lawmakers proposed new legislation to limit early morning access to wildlife-heavy trails and to require reinforced fencing along known gator zones. The park now closes the outer trail until 9 a.m., and though Emma once resisted barriers between people and nature, even her family supports the change. "If it makes someone pause, it's worth it," her sister Rachel said. Old Scar, the massive male alligator believed responsible, was captured a week later by licensed trappers. He was sedated, tagged, and transferred to an undisclosed wildlife facility outside the county. Officials refused to say whether he'll be housed permanently or euthanized. Some locals called for his death. Others argued he was only doing what he was born to do. Either way, he is gone from Silver Pines. But the memory of that place, the stillness, the fog, the moment of the strike remains. The final shots linger there, a slow pan across the lake at dusk. The surface is glassy, unmoved, reflecting purples and blues of a fading sky. The path is empty, no runners, no voices, no signs of struggle, just silence. Nature looks no different than it did before the tragedy, and that's the point. The wild doesn't mourn, it doesn't remember, it only waits. On screen, a final message appears. You can respect wild nature, but you must never believe it respects you back. Then, in memory of Emma Clarke, 1,992,024, the narrator's voice returns, low and steady. She believed in coexistence. But the wild only knows instinct. And as the screen fades to black, what lingers is not judgment but a sobering clarity. Emma's death wasn't senseless, it was symbolic. A reminder that love alone cannot rewire a predator's brain, and that reverence without caution can become sacrifice. Hers is a story of beauty and brutality, of hope misplaced not in malice, but in myth. And in that myth, others now see the truth, that the wild must be cherished but never trusted.